Hello and welcome to 10 Minute Talk. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Hope. Following this month's theme of groups in Australian society who suffer from poverty, today's show will focus on
the impact of inequality and poverty on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. This particular population has suffered many inequalities compared to the non-Indigenous Australians over the years. Ever since people started migrating to Australia, Indigenous people have been disadvantaged in many ways. In 1788, this started through health issues as disease and other problems came across to the country. As Indigenous Australians had not come into contact with this before, they were severely affected. This disadvantage has not stopped. For example, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, in 2011, the Indigenous population had 487.9 people for every 10,000 that were homeless, compared to the 35.2 non-Indigenous. This is just one way this group is affected by poverty and inequality. Poverty rates for the Indigenous population in 2006 was 38.1% compared to the 14.1% of non-Indigenous Australians, according to the SPRC, Community Understanding of Poverty and Social Exclusion Study. Other areas of poverty include education, income, employment and working conditions, just to name a few. And now over to Hope, who will tell us a little bit more about how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are affected by poverty.
Thanks, Jordan. Poverty is as real in Australia as it is anywhere in the world. It can be defined as the state of being extremely poor. The World Health Organization associates poverty with the undermining of a range of key attributes, including health. Poverty-induced people are less well-nourished, have less information, and are less able to access healthcare. The Indigenous Australians are affected by poverty and disadvantage, with the median incomes of Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders being just 65% of those non-Indigenous persons. Material poverty is measured through social indicators such as health, education, and income. Indigenous people are dying on average 17 years before non-Indigenous people. They are less educated. Studies show that 76.8% of non-Indigenous students finished Year 12, while only 36% of Indigenous students completed their school. Overall, Indigenous Australians have experienced plenty of inequality throughout their history. It is improving, however, there is still a long way to go for equality across all population groups. Earlier in the week, we interviewed Sophie from the ABS. Here's that interview now.
Sophie, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Jordan. I'm happy to be here.
So, statistically speaking, tell us about the impact inequality and poverty have on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community.
Well, Jordan, the impact of inequality and poverty is devastating, and there are countless consequences that follow it. One of the consequences of poverty is that living under the strain of it day after day causes great deals of stress, anxiety, and all-around general psychological distress. In 2008, 28% of Indigenous Australians were living in dwellings that contained major structural problems, such as major cracks in the walls or flooring. According to a survey, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples living in such surroundings were more likely to report high or very high levels of psychological distress compared to those who did not. There is a similar correlation between overcrowded housing and mental illness. On another note, it is a known fact that at times, during periods of great hardship, some turn to drugs and other substances in the hopes of finding some sort of relief from the enormous pressures of day-to-day life that they face. According to a survey taken in 2010, 20% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians aged 15 and up had used illicit substances in the previous 12 months, and 39% had experimented with substances over the course of their lives. Another survey showed that substance abusers were also more likely to suffer from high or very high levels of psychological distress. Yet another consequence of poverty and inequality is that of social exclusion. An analysis undertaken in 2001 showed that 48% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experience social exclusion. The social exclusion of Indigenous Australians has been exacerbated by various other factors. From a survey taken in 2008, it was found that 15% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians had difficulty in both communicating in English and in being understood by English speakers. The 2008 National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Survey collected valuable data of the level of trust Indigenous Australians had in local doctors, hospitals and police to do the right thing by them. On a national scale, 36% of the population agreed or strongly agreed with this. Adding on to this, 71% of Indigenous Australian adults living in remote areas reported having no public transport in their local area, with 15% unable to reach places when needed due to lack of transport. Indeed, from what we understand of these statistics, it is frighteningly obvious that the impact of poverty and inequality on Australia's Indigenous community is both great and far-reaching.
Thanks for your time, Sophie. Hope to see you back again.
Hope to be back again soon, Jordan.
Now back to the studio. There is not just one Indigenous group in Australia. There are many different perspectives, languages and lands. Ideologies have excluded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the past when Australia was very individualistic. Indigenous people were excluded in these times, being unable to vote and at one time in history having their children taken away from them. Children were forcibly taken in what has become known as the stolen generations. From the late 1800s until the 1970s, Aboriginal children were taken away from their families to be assimilated into Western society and culture. Almost every Indigenous family was impacted. Many lost contact with their families and their culture. Indigenous people from a particular group are very much a part of their own community. But what about Australian society as a whole? Due to the cultural differences between Western society and Indigenous people, the criminal justice system can be a very negative experience and concept for Aboriginals. To try and bridge this gap, there are now Indigenous courts in Australia to promote equality and to give them a cultural choice. For example, the Koori Court in Victoria, which allows the Indigenous community to have a part in the court's process. However, there is still significant disadvantages between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Australia. Due to the services and access to these services being unequal across the population, especially for the Indigenous people, life expectancies in 2010 to 2012 was 10.6 years lower than that of the non-Indigenous population for male and 9.5 years for females. The system used in Australia focuses on Western concepts and doesn't include all aspects of Indigenous lifestyles. Indigenous people have always cared greatly for the land and those on it. Their medicine was also very different to services now offered in Australia. We also interviewed Maddie earlier in the week from the Department of Human Services. This is the interview.
We provide payments to help Indigenous Australians finish studies and to support them while they are looking for work. Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islander people looking to complete their studies are eligible for AB Study, which is a payment that can help to cover the costs of education, accommodation, food, prescription medicine and travel costs to and from your place of study. You have to be enrolled in an approved full-time course or apprenticeship to be eligible, but we see this as an incentive to get young Indigenous Australians into further education so that they can increase their employment opportunities. This is a payment exclusive to Indigenous Australians, but of course they are also eligible for other payments available to everybody, such as the New Start allowance. This is another incentive to keep employment opportunities open for the community, where we provide payments so long as the individual is looking for work through an employment pathway plan. An employment pathway plan is a plan of activities you agree to undertake while you are looking for work, to give you the best chance of getting a job, such as job applications, attending interviews and so on. The idea is to have as many people as possible either with a job or on the way to having one. All of these benefits have been put into place so that people can afford to live. There have been counter-arguments, however, that the aim of them is not on eliminating poverty, but getting people into the workforce. The way that we see it, the ideal situation for a person is to work, and it seems that the community understands this too. The more that we can do to get people into the workforce by getting them into contact with employment opportunity companies like Mission Australia, or reducing the burden of the expenses of studying, the sooner these people can reach the ideal situation of gaining employment.
Thank you for watching. Hope to see you again next week.